Is this another wasted year? Is the Raiders season already over? Last week I didn't record a new episode, admittedly, because I was so upset about the Commanders game that I knew I'd say something I'd regret. That's right. I was so upset and disappointed that I had to take the whole week to cool down. I hope that shows you how deep my fandom runs. I live and fall with this team, and for over 2 decades, it's been a lot of falling. I had written some notes that I was going to use for my recording in preparation for this Bears game. But like I said, I was so upset that I just couldn't bring myself to record. So I'm going to compare some of those notes to what transpired to today, and I guess we'll have fun seeing what I was right and wrong about. The first thing I wrote was this in reference to the Commanders game. Quote, "Last week was embarrassing. It was a pathetic performance all around. It was distressing to say the least because it took the air out of the room." End quote. Well, fast forward to today, and the win has been taken completely out of the auditorium. What started out so promising with that opening road win against New England has morphed into the same old nightmare. In fact, our record is already worse this year at the quarter mark than it was last year. Anyways, I continue to my notes. Quote, "The Raiders had a golden opportunity to march into Washington, dominate a team that wasn't healthy, go 2-1, and head into week 4 in full control of their destiny. Instead, what happened? The Commanders' defense shot through our offensive line like they were ghosts. Having followed this team for a very long time, I've seen some very bad football out of the Raiders, but holy cow, that might have been the worst offensive line performance I've ever seen." End quote. Well, after today's loss against the Bears, it's safe to say we blew another golden opportunity because the Bears weren't fully healthy today, just like the Commanders weren't. Now, the offensive line played better, giving better protection to Geno and opening more holes for Genty to run through. By the way, I'll take a small victory lap in this regard because I was one game late in my prediction regarding Genty finally going off and putting the league on notice. In the episode, Genty Issues, I told everyone to calm down and that I knew the line would get better at opening holes for Genty. Well, after this banner game, stats-wise, for Genty, I hope we can table the talk about Genty being a bust. Now back to the offensive line. Our offensive line played much better today, but as is the cursed nature of the Raiders, the team never clicks as a whole together. On a day when the offensive line decided to step up and get its act together, Geno Smith decides to throw a myriad of interceptions, placing himself in the league leader category for interceptions. What an ugly and dreadful performance by Geno Smith. And let me rain on my victory lap regarding my Genty predictions. Boy, did I misread Geno Smith. With how well he played against New England, and with how many yards he posted, and with how well he managed that game, for a moment I thought our quarterback woes were over. And then came the Chargers game, where Geno had a similar game as today's, interception-wise. But I gave Geno a reprieve, saying that he needed to get it out of his system. Hopefully he'd learn to not take so many unnecessary chances with the ball, and that at least the whole team played hard against what appeared to be a premier Chargers team. Then came the Commanders game, where the offensive line was so porous and awful that it was hard to judge anyone else on the offensive side of the ball. But this game was a terrible look for Geno. It was also a terrible look for Pete Carroll due to the fact that I thought Pete should have benched Geno after his third interception. I didn't even think it would have been controversial to do so because Geno clearly had some mental block going on, and no decent coach would have continued allowing a quarterback to struggle in such a team-jeopardizing way. But nope, Carroll, who's proving to be more and more stubborn with each passing week, inexplicably left Geno, who'd go on to jeopardize the team more with his underthrow to Dante Thornton, in the game. Speaking of Carroll, back to what I wrote last week. In regards to the Commanders game, quote, "It was so bad that it totally negated everything I thought about our team benefiting from veteran Pete Carroll's leadership. I can't help but view Carroll in a lesser light," end quote. Well, now that lesser light is barely dim anymore. Whether it's life or football, ego can be the great killer of progress. And in the case of Carroll, and not wanting to be wrong about Geno Smith, I can't help but think that there was some kind of stubbornness keeping him from doing the right thing and putting in Kenny Pickett in place of Geno. In the Commanders game, I thought the ego issue was inexplicably keeping Jackson Powers Johnson on the bench. In this game, it was Carroll's failure to abandon ship on a clearly struggling Geno Smith. And Pete, no one was telling you to bench Geno for the rest of the season, although I'm not 100% against that at this point. But at least the least you could have done was recognize that he wasn't right in the head for this game and that we needed another option under center in order to better preserve our lead when we had it. Anyways, moving along. Last week, I also wrote, quote, when your offensive line looks as horrible as ours did against Washington, you've got to ask, are you guys even practicing during the week? Are you guys even studying film? Are all the coaches just chilling at the casinos all week? Are the players? Seriously, what is going on with this team and franchise in general? It's like we're cursed, but that's a lazy way of looking at it. There's clearly deep structural incompetence somewhere, and it needs to be identified and flushed out of our organization. End quote. Now, on the Raiders' defense, this game was definitely a better all-around performance with better all-around effort than the game against Washington. But our franchise motto is just win, baby. It's not just make it close, baby, or just get moral victories, baby. So although it looked like some things were cleaned up, we're still sitting here with a losing product. I want to feed off what I said with there's a deep structural incompetence somewhere. I think it's ownership. I know he'll never do it. And I never thought I'd say this since I'm such a fan of Al Davis and never wanting to see the team out of the Davis family control. But it might be time for Mark to sell the team. Al Davis was a great man who would hold his coaches accountable. And he was able to hold his coaches accountable because he himself was a former coach and all-around football mastermind. Players and coaches knew it, so they were always on their toes under his supervision. If Al was still alive, and alive in his prime, of course, he wouldn't have allowed Geno to stay in the game. He would have seen what was going on, and he would have made a call to the coach or to the necessary people to bench Geno. And the coaches, A, wouldn't question it because it's not their team, and B, they'd respect it because they'd have known that Al wasn't playing around. Mark Davis is out of his element. I don't think he knows enough about football to force positive change from his ownership chair. It's been a problem for years that's kept our Raiders tied to losing coaches, losing schemes, and losing players for much longer than they otherwise should have been tolerated. Heck, in this same vein, and in light of all the Raiders podcasters and fans calling for JPJ against Washington last week, I guarantee that Al, being a football junkie, would have forced a JPJ start against Washington. And who knows, with how much better we've seen the O-line play with JPJ on it, maybe we would have had a different result against Washington as well as a different result in this game. But what I'm trying to say is this. I don't believe that Mark Davis is a serious person. I don't believe that his heart is in this. Obviously, he wants to win. Who doesn't? But he clearly doesn't have the football IQ or accompanying killer instinct to make his coaches do the right thing in spite of their own egos. My notes continued, quote, Raiders, how long is enough? Do we really need another decade of this? I mean, seriously, I know so many OG Raider fans who go to work every day, do their jobs, handle their business, and for years they've had to suffer while their team, which preaches just win, baby, and commitment to excellence, fails to do its job and handle its business. Year after year, decade after decade. It's sickening and insulting. Our franchise is a historic one, which has a history of championship success, has a history of being on the cutting edge of important matters like racial equality, and has a history of being a rebel who successfully challenged the NFL and the status quo in general, in which, thanks to Al Davis, was undeniably vital in the creation of the NFL via the AFL merger. What I'm trying to say is this team's legacy alone doesn't deserve to see its current product in the gutter. Our fans, who are possibly the most loyal fan base in all of sports, don't deserve the continued ineptitude. That shield and those colors mean something very good and noble, not only in football, but in sports and organized sports and society at large. We fans, who passionately and loyally support it, deserve to win. We deserve competent leadership that cares, and we fans don't deserve another wasted, disappointing year. Enough's enough. End quote. Nothing much new to add to that after this loss to the Bears. I mean, this one was a real kick in the gut. especially since we should have been up by 3 scores had it not been for Geno's interceptions. Believe it or not, absent Geno's interceptions, this should have been a dominant Raiders win score-wise. But yeah, today's game was rough, and it really left me with that cold but all too familiar feeling of, how much longer will this last? Are we really in for another losing season? How much longer will this go on? Then my notes turned their attention to our coordinators. In regards to Chip Kelly, I said this quote: "As a Raider fan and Al Davis disciple, I'm a big fan of the deep ball, as big a fan of the deep ball as anyone else. However, if the home run isn't there, the home run isn't there. Hey, Chip Kelly, if you're such an offensive guru and genius, draw up some short passing routes to take the heat off of Geno and our linemen. And I can't believe I have to explain this, but if your quarterback completes more and more short and intermediate passes, it causes the defense to back off, and then you can hammer them with the run or the deep ball. But Kelly, you come off as very Josh McDaniels-esque when you stubbornly cling to something that's not working. You took too long to adjust the pass game against the Chargers, and you didn't seem to adjust it at all against the Commanders. You just sat there exasperated, throwing your hands in the air, while Geno continued struggling to buy time on an overly long developing passing route game. I said it in a previous podcast, and I'll say it again here. The last time our team was consistently good and regularly going to the playoffs was when we operated a West Coast offense under Gruden and later Callahan. So even though we'd all love to see the long game work, never forget that it's just win, baby. Not just win, baby, as long as it's by the deep pass. Not just win, baby, unless we have to resort to more of a balanced West Coast offensive approach. No, it's just win, baby, Kelly. That means this: you put your ego aside, and whatever preconceived notions you had, you put those aside, and you do what works in the moment in order to secure the win. Winning is the only thing that matters." End quote. Now, although I stand by everything I wrote then, after today's game against the Bears, I did like Kelly's approach a tad bit better. A tad bit. Tad being the key word. But still, Kelly seems to never call the right play in key circumstances. He has fancy play syndrome and gets cutesy in areas where the obvious play is much more advisable. He runs when he should pass. He passes when he should run. And a tad bit better means nothing when your team's still losing at the end of the day. And sure, the lion's share of our offensive woes against the Bears lands on Geno's shoulders. I get that. That's for certain. But even then, I wish Kelly would stop with all his college-looking, cutesy spread offense stuff. Put Geno in base more often and call up some more short and intermediate routes that are quicker and safer to throw. Not to mention higher percentage in getting us crucial first down yardage in second and long and third down situations. But where I really think I'll diverge from most of Raider Nation, and this is what I'll close it out with, is in my assessment of Patrick Graham. Because what I wrote last week came true again this week. I wrote, quote, "And as far as Patrick Graham goes, I'm still not impressed. And I haven't been impressed for years. I trust my eyes. And here's what I see too often with Patrick Graham's defenses, our defenses. He brings endless pressure, which works on bad, unsophisticated, easily rattled, not too bright quarterbacks. But it fails 100% of the time against good quarterbacks who simply settle in, trust that the pressure will leave receivers wide open, and make easy throws. And it's not just bad, inexperienced quarterbacks. All quarterbacks and offensive coordinators who go against us realize this and carve up our secondary with short, quick passes. It's a weekly occurrence that I'm sick of watching. Graham, you get paid millions to stop offenses. So stop one, please. Just can you stop one? Starting with Chicago. Get a little more nuanced with your calls and schemes. Stop telling our corners to play so soft and far off of their receivers, and shut down the Bears." End quote. Well, What do we see today? Patrick Graham's pressure was wreaking havoc early on in the game, no doubt. Max Crosby's pressure in particular was a menace in the early going of today's game. But as the game wore on, what happened? Caleb Williams, who's a physically talented guy, settled in, grew accustomed to the constant pressure, and eventually began shredding our secondary, which, with extremely short and intermediate passing routes that took advantage of our extremely soft and way too far off receivers secondary. Everyone saw it. While watching the game on Sunday Ticket, I had Raider Mitch of Chat Sport Raiders in my ear, and everyone, from Mitch to the fans in the live chat, were completely blown away by how soft our secondary was playing. What's the point of bringing all that heat when Patrick Graham is essentially telling his corners and safeties to fall back and allow all short and intermediate passes to get completed? I get that man coverage can get beat from time to time, but it's totally pointless to not even try to cover receivers and allow opposing offenses to kill you by 1,000 paper cuts. That's what ultimately allowed the Bears to come back in this game, our soft secondary. Even the game announcers were talking about how high our defense ranks in its use of zone coverage. Hey, Graham, is it working? I'll help you out. It's not. Patrick Graham needs to trust his guys a lot more and coach them to play closer. Stop giving up so much cushion to opposing receivers, because incessant pressure, just like incessant anything else, eventually grows stale. Opposing quarterbacks and offensive lines grow numb to it. They grow used to it. They settle in and they pick our secondary apart. And it doesn't help when the secondary they're picking apart offers virtually zero resistance by design. Is the season over? Technically, no. There are still 13 games to go. But this Geno Smith turnover situation looks systemic, and it's very difficult to bounce back when your quarterback is flat out bad. And if Carroll wasn't going to bench Geno in this game, when, if ever, will he bench him? What if this isn't a fluke? It's been 2 games of this now. And what if Kenny Pickett, who isn't a prime Tom Brady by any stretch, but who was a first-round pick with some starting experience, came in today and showed us something? Who knows? I'm just asking. To make matters worse, when Pete was asked if he considered benching Geno during the game, he said no. Flat out no. And I know. What else is he supposed to say? I get it. But we can't have another turnover fest from Geno again. And it makes me really nervous because he's been this way in 2 out of 4 games. 50%. Yikes. And although most people agree that Patrick Graham should call tighter coverage in the secondary and get a little more nuanced with his approach, he's called this type of defense for years now. The one we saw today against Chicago, the one we've seen all season so far, playing way too soft in the secondary. It's just so disheartening because we fans wait all season with high hopes only for this team in particular to continuously and habitually fall short. We'll see how next week goes. Obviously, 2-3 is a much better conversation than 1-4.